Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at emptiness and liberation from a Buddhist perspective. We've got two really cool sources to work with today. One's kind of scholarly and the other's more like direct teaching. I think it'll be really interesting to see how these ideas can actually lead to a more peaceful life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. What I find really fascinating is how these sources encourage us to look both inward and outward, to really understand emptiness. It's not just some abstract idea, it's something you can actually experience.
For sure. And the source doesn't hold back on the imagery, like when it describes inner emptiness. It talks about emptiness within our bodies,
Yeah.
even in our organs and senses. I was really struck by the mention of places of opening, like our mouth
Yeah.
and nostrils.
Right. You know, that really connects to the Buddhist idea of impermanence, how everything inside us is constantly in this state of change, like flowing,
Right.
breathing. There's no solid self there if you really look closely.
That's such a powerful thought. And then the source goes on to describe outer emptiness, like the spaces between branches, the openness of a cave or a valley or even a river. It really made me see those everyday things in a whole new way.
Absolutely. It's all about recognizing interdependence. Buddhism teaches that nothing exists by itself, even those empty spaces. They're teeming with interconnectedness. It's a really beautiful way to reframe how we see the world, wouldn't you say?
Totally. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. The source explicitly says that inner and outer emptiness are actually one and the same.
Yeah, that's a really core principle in Buddhist philosophy. It's about breaking free from this illusion that we're separate, independent,
Yeah, I get that.
It's about recognizing how everything's connected. Remember that line, not I, nor I, nor I, nor I. It points to the idea of anatta, the concept of non-self, or the absence of a permanent, unchanging self.
I'll be honest, that non-self thing, it still kind of blows my mind. It really challenges how we normally think about ourselves.
Yeah, it really does.
What would you say to someone who's struggling with that concept?
I think it's helpful to think about it like letting go. Letting go of our tightly held ideas about who we are. Instead of clinging to a fixed self, you can start to see yourself as part of something larger, part of something that's always changing. It can be really liberating.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about emptiness, inside and out. But where does consciousness fit into all this?
Right. So the source describes the realms of consciousness as coming from this harmony of 12 elements, both internal and external.
12 elements. I got to admit, I'm not sure I follow. What are those exactly?
Let me break it down. Think of them as the building blocks of our experience. There are 6 internal senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and mind. And then 5 corresponding external sense objects: form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And finally, there's consciousness itself, which arises from the interaction of all these elements.
Okay, I think I see how they connect. But how do these 12 elements create our actual experience of the world?
Okay, so imagine you see a flower. Your eyes, the sense organ of sight, perceive the form and color of that flower, which are external sense objects. Then this information goes to your mind, the 6th internal sense. And that's what creates the conscious experience of seeing and appreciating that flower, this interaction of the senses, sense objects, and consciousness. It's happening constantly and shapes our whole perception of reality.
So it's not just our senses taking in info, our minds are actively shaping that information.
Exactly. And this brings us to a crucial point in the source, the statement that the mind is the root of all.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. It suggests that our minds are way more influential than we might realize. But what does that actually mean for how we live our lives?
Well, it makes you think. If our minds are really shaping everything, are we really in control? Or are we just reacting to this constant flow of thoughts and feeling? Like the Buddha said. That's something we'll explore more as we talk about the path to liberation.
I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Me too.
So if our minds are the root of everything, how do we even begin to find this liberation the source talks about? It all feels kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a big concept. Maybe it helps to remember what we were just talking about, how inner and outer emptiness are actually the same thing. That realization can be a powerful first step towards liberation.
I see how that connection is important. But how does understanding emptiness actually lead to freedom?
Well, the source puts it this way. When one observes this empty realm, all is not I, nor I, nor I, nor I. If one observes the empty realm in this way, one knows it as it is, and when one sees it as it is, one is free from desire.
So by seeing through this illusion of a separate self, We naturally let go of like clinging and desire. Is that what it's saying?
Exactly. When we grasp this concept of emptiness, it helps us detach from those rigid ideas about ourselves and the world. And that includes detaching from desire.
Okay, but isn't desire kind of natural? We're always striving for something, a new job, a relationship, even just like a good meal. Are you saying we should give all that up?
Not necessarily. Buddhism isn't about completely renouncing everything. It's more about recognizing that attachment to those things, is what causes suffering.
Okay, so how does that work?
Imagine you're really attached to a specific outcome. Let's say you're fixated on getting a promotion. You might spend all your time and energy chasing it and neglect other parts of your life. And what happens if you don't get it?
Yeah, you'd be crushed.
Right. That kind of suffering. It comes from that attachment to the outcome.
That makes sense. So if emptiness helps us loosen that grip of desire, what's the next step?
Well, the Source has this really interesting line about the power of the mind. It says the Dharma is preceded by the mind, and the mind is powerful and speedy. When the mind is first moved, it is able to speak and act.
That almost sounds like a warning. Like our minds can be both really powerful and maybe even destructive.
I think that's a valid way to see it. The passage really highlights how powerful the mind is. Our thoughts shape our actions, our words, ultimately our experiences. That's why Buddhism places so much emphasis on mental discipline, the ability to direct our minds, instead of being controlled by them.
So if we accept that our minds are this powerful force, how do we learn to harness it? How do we stop being slaves to our thoughts and emotions?
This is where practices like meditation come in. Now, meditation isn't about emptying your mind or reaching some blissful state. It's more about cultivating awareness of your thoughts and feelings, observing them without judging, and learning to detach from those thoughts and feelings that cause suffering.
It sounds like building a muscle, strengthening our ability to choose how we react instead of just being on autopilot.
That's a great way to put it. The more we practice awareness and non-judgment, the more space we create between our thoughts and our reactions. And that lets us respond to challenges with more wisdom and compassion.
I love that. Speaking of compassion, there's this passage I found really moving, the description of the path of a bhikkhu. It says, the mind is good and not greedy. It is full of compassion, is the path of a bhikkhu.
That passage is beautiful. It really captures those qualities of a liberated mind, a mind free from greed and ill will, filled with kindness and compassion. And while this might seem like an ideal for monks or nuns, these qualities are beneficial for everyone, anyone seeking a more peaceful and fulfilling life.
So it's not about becoming a monk or leaving the world behind. It's about cultivating those qualities within ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that goodness, compassion, and contentment are universal values that can change our lives and the lives of those around us.
And that ties back to the idea of interconnectedness we talked about. If we're all connected, then our actions and intentions really impact the world.
Absolutely. The path to liberation isn't a solitary thing. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and extending that kindness and compassion to everyone.
This deep dive has been incredible. We started talking about emptiness and then how it connects to consciousness. And now we see how these concepts can lead to liberation.
Yeah, it's amazing how these ideas all fit together. When you understand emptiness, you can detach from unhealthy desires. That detachment lets you have more awareness, more control over your mind. And as we become more mindful, we can nurture goodness and compassion and contentment, which ultimately leads to a more fulfilling life.
It's like this ripple effect. It starts with a change in how we see things, and then it transforms our whole way of being.
Exactly. And remember, it's a gradual process. It's not like you reach perfect enlightenment overnight. It's about taking small steps each day to cultivate these qualities within yourself.
That's really encouraging. It makes it feel more attainable. It's not about being a perfect Buddhist or meditating for hours. It's about making conscious choices in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And those choices can be really simple, like paying attention to your breath when you're stressed, choosing kindness over anger, or even just appreciating the beauty of the present moment.
These sources have given me so much to think about. It makes you really examine how you're living your life, how you face your challenges, what causes you stress.
It really does. As you go about your day, I want you to think about this. How can you use emptiness to shift your perspective? How can it help you handle those tough moments with a little more grace, a little more ease?
That's a great question to think about. And don't forget to check out the show notes for more reading on all this. Until next time, keep diving deep.